Good evening everyone, LordFlash here again, and we're going to be starting a new career on Kerbal Space Program. I thought I'd give RimWorld a little bit of a rest. Most of the videos I've uploaded for a while now have been videos of Flashtown. I thought it was time to go back to something a little bit different. Still sticking on the space theme though. So, as those of you who've been playing Kerbal Space Program and following it will know, KSP 1.1 dropped, I think it was last week. Which has finally updated the Windows version to 64-bit, which gives us beautiful performance, much better across the board, and I can finally be running something like, I think I've got 50 mods running at the moment. I can provide a mod list if that's what people would like to see. I can get that posted up on the channel. So we're going to be starting a new career. We're still using a lot of the contract packs. We'll be going through a good amount of realistic progression, starting with rockets built in the 1930s by the Germans, moving up onto kind of the experiments using rockets derived from the V2s by both the Americans and the Russians in the 50s, along with things like Sputnik, Explorer, Voyager, etc. And then we're going to see where that takes us. I like the contract system. It gives us a really good... just a really good way of progressing through the game and giving meaning to what can otherwise be quite sandboxy, just progressing through the science career tree. So, I think to start off, we started on our customary 100,000 funds, and we're just going to be upgrading the contract station first, so we've got 7 available. And I suppose this series may also actually act as a bit of a tutorial for those of you looking to start out in Kerbal Space Program, people who struggle with it, people who've perhaps joined it with 1.1, see what it's all about, or people who are just struggling to get things off the ground and see how you design rockets from the most basic stuff all the way up to, well, I won't say too complex because I'm not a perfect rocket builder. But let's start. We've got 7 contracts we can accept. So we start off with the A3. This was a rocket built in a ballistic missile series designed by Werner von Braun in the 1930s. And this was a vehicle which was simply a cruise missile which operated within the atmosphere. So it doesn't need much delta V. Now, for those of you who don't know, delta V is essentially, to give an easy summary, it's a calculation of the amount of energy in meters per second that your craft can produce from its engines over the various different stages. And there's various different delta V requirements to do certain tasks, like get onto suborbital flight, get into orbit, go to higher orbits, get to the moon, establishing polar orbits, etc. And I tend to overspec all my vehicles because I'm not a brilliant rocket scientist, even in Kerbal Space Program. So, hopefully that's a good start. So we'll start with building the A3. This is just a cruise missile that has to act within the atmosphere. We get 10 grand for that, 7.5 and 2 science and completion, some reputation. Perfect. The field research ones I ignore. That's okay. That's weird. I don't really need that one. Let's go with escape the atmosphere. Orbit Kerbin, that's a pretty good one. Scientific data from Kerbin and launch our first vessel. That gives us a good advance on funds. We're back up to 86,000 from that alone. Some of that we won't join SSI Aerospace just yet. We don't need to. And we don't want to start denying stuff that we don't want yet. So, let's go to the vehicle assembly building. Now, the parts we've got to start with at the career are pretty limited. Now, where I am using mods to make the experience easier or the designing of rockets easier, I will let people know so that if you're new, you can go, oh, I want that mod to be able to build rockets and know how much power they've got, for example. So, I'll start with the Octo Cube. We're building the A3, so this is a ballistic missile. Let's put that on there. Looks ballistic missile-y. Just one of these, and then I think we won't need much more than a Gustav rocket motor. And that's already got 3,000 meters per second, so do I really need lots of fuel in this? There we are. I'll take all the fuel out of there. I think we'll lower the thrust on this, so it's about 1.5. It doesn't want to be too powerful. Now, this won't get to space. Now, I could very easily actually build something that would go into orbit right now. I could do that without too much of a worry. However, since I'm trying to build rockets which represent what was actually going on in rocket science, I can't just slam as many things on there as I want. It also doesn't make as much money in a contract. So you can see this costs us 2 grand. I think the payout on this one's 7.5. We want to keep the rocket projects we're launching profitable so that we're continuing to make money for the space program and can invest it in facilities, etc. So that's our A3 rocket built. Now, I'm currently playing this with the remote tech mod. Now this requires you to have signal connections to your satellites. So I'm going to whack an antenna on there, and just so we can do some things like transmitting some science data back, I'm also going to pop a battery on here. Okay. That's perfect. So that keeps our Delta V fairly sane. We'll pop a thermometer on the side, and we'll pop a barometer on the other side. And that lets us start doing some basic science experiments, gathering some data, etc. So we'll save that up, and let's take it for launch. Now the loading times are still fairly long because I've rammed my KSP full of mods. Hopefully it's not going to crash with Shadowplay recording, but we'll see. Here we are. Perfect, it is working. So there's the A3 on the very basic launch pad, you know, 1940s style bunker over there. So first thing I'm going to do is activate the SAS, which is stability control, and this will help us make sure the rocket stays on target. I think we'll log some pressure data and transmit that experiment. Now as you can see, as we're transmitting that, we're actually using a lot of the electric charge. So I think if we also transmit some temperature gauges from here, that will actually use up most of our electric charge. So it's time for us to get this thing to go. This thing's not going to be recoverable, there's no parachute, so it's just a case of hitting the launch button and seeing where it takes us. We're going to try and steer this over the sea, try and set some land distance records, try and set some altitude and speed records as well, because setting the records early on in the career really helps you with both funding and science. So we're going to go straight up, start to build up our speed, try and get this thing up to probably about 200 meters per second, which is less than the speed of sound, and then we're going to start angling it over towards the sea. Now we've got these control fins on the bottom to help keep it stable, and you can see they're aligned to give it almost a wing profile as it points out this way. And this Gustav rocket motor, now I don't know if this was added in 1.1 or if this is actually from one of my parts mods, but I can see if I can confirm that later for you guys. So we're going to start tipping this thing over now, and it's quite twitchy because it's very light. Okay. I'm not enjoying that too much, so I think we'll just throttle this back a little and see if we can start tipping our rocket over, because the more it's tipped over, the further the distance it will go from the KSC, and this thing is not controlling particularly happily. But we're above the clouds, and as the atmosphere gets thinner, we're going to start picking up speed even on lower thrust, and I want this thing to go pretty far. Maybe the edge of space, we could aim for the edge of space, but it doesn't really need to go that high. I wonder if we have enough to send a science scan. I don't know. I think we'll have to leave that one for next time. But we're starting to break records. We've just broken the sound barrier, I think. So we're going to start tipping this over into horizontal flight. Let's see if we can actually make it into an intercontinental ballistic missile. Obviously not with a nuclear payload. Let's wham that up to full. Take this thing fully horizontal. Moon up there. So its total speed that it's achieved is going to be nearly 600 meters per second, which is pretty nice. So if we look at the map, it's just going into the sea. But we could have easily taken it all the way up and whacked the city here. So I'm using, I think it's stock visual enhancements to enhance the way the planet looks. I used to use environmental visual enhancements, but I didn't like it as much. The clouds weren't as, I guess, floofy would be the word. They were more kind of a solid layer, and whilst they're still a solid layer on this, when you're looking up at them from below and flying through them, they perform much more like clouds. So we'll just time accelerate this and see how it flies back into the sea. It'll follow a near perfect ballistic trajectory, because if you look at the shape of it, it's essentially a bullet that we've built. Oh, now before we run out of connection, as this thing's out of power and doesn't really need to control itself anymore, let's try and transmit some more science. Nope, no charge. There we are. Starting to get our Mach effect as we slink down. Let's take a look at what we've completed. So we've launched our first vessel. Nice. The A3 is obviously complete. And we've set a load of records. So each of those comes with 10 grand, 1 science point and some reputation, which is fab really. So that's maybe nearly 100 grand. Ooh. And some scientific data from Kerbin. Beautiful Mach effect as we slam this thing down into the ocean. Now, the mod I'm using for the beautiful graphical effects on the sea, which affect the sun, give us lens flare, etc., that sort of thing, that's called Scatterer. I'd highly recommend it if you've got a computer capable of handling those sorts of effects. Yeah, it really makes it look a lot prettier than it does in stock. Let's pop back to the Space Center now. So I think in this video we're going to cover both the A3 and the V2, which are both quite interesting rockets. So the V2 obviously is the Vengeance weapon, which was developed late during World War II. And that was developed, I think, again, Werner von Braun took quite a lot of lead on that. And that was used, well, that was actually the second in the line of Vengeance weapons, with the first being the V1, which was powered by a rocket motor and used a very simple guidance system, which essentially used pulleys and weights, which was set so that when something happened to it, the pulley would cut the fuel line and the thing would just drop out of the sky and explode. And the V1 used a very, very crude rocket motor that made kind of a noise a bit like a motorbike or, I guess, a petrol lawnmower. Whereas the V2 flew so high and flew supersonic and used a much more sophisticated rocket motor that it couldn't be heard from the ground. And it was much faster than aircraft that Britain had available to it at the time. Whereas the V1 Vengeance weapons, which flew more like conventional aeroplanes and then just cut out and fell over and hit the ground, the V2s were targeted, I think they were radar guided. So the V2s were much harder to stop as a weapon. Whereas the V1s, pilots discovered that you could go up to them with your wing, fly alongside them with your wing, and if you placed your wingtip under the wingtip of the V1 rocket and kind of flicked the control stick into a roll, you would roll over the V1 and it would cut the cables and it would just fly into the ground. And if you could do this either over the English Channel or into some farmer's field, that was obviously better than central London. Now the V2, much more deadly. I don't think pilots could stop them. They could catch them up in the later fighters, some of the later high-powered British fighters, and shoot them down with cannon fire. But this is incredibly dangerous when you consider I think they had about 2 tons of high explosive in them. They were designed to cause huge amounts of devastation and try and take Britain out of the war, which they didn't do, but they were pretty horrifying weapons. It was the first, I think it's the first and possibly only use of real cruise missiles in warfare. Maybe some were used in some of the wars in the 60s and 70s in the Middle East. So forgive me if that fact's wrong, but it's the most obvious use I can think of cruise missiles in warfare in human history. World War II is good for setting records like that. Lovely records about how many people you've blown up with a new weapon. We're not going to accept any of these because they require flying to zones, and I'm not good at designing aeroplanes. I tried building some on a testing game, and I killed about 3 pilots, ended up trying to build some drone planes. They didn't work too well either, ended up just using parachutes. We've also got 20 science, so let's pop over to research and development. Now this is where a lot of the planning for how you're going to complete your contracts is going to take place, for those of you who are new to Kerbal Space. And as you get science points you can spend them, and everything goes up by increasing amounts as you go up the chain, so 45, 90, 160, etc. And you unlock new parts with each one. So we've got 4, 12 there. We've got enough to unlock everything in this first tier. Now this tech tree does look very different to the stock one. That's because I'm using a mod called Community Tech Tree, which adds more capacity for mods. It adds a heck of a lot more nodes. Now because I don't have mods which use these nodes, not all of them are filled in. But that's not an issue. It doesn't affect the gameplay. It just means you've got loads of extra nodes in there. So we've researched some basic parts, struts, some more exciting rockets, some more science experiments, fuel tanks, engines, stack separators, stuff that's all interesting and cool for quite landing us down and so on. Now the accelerometer, that's a pretty cool device. Some more batteries, Sputnik, a command seat, ladders. I think it has actually jigged around where certain things are being unlocked as well. Stack decouplers, all very nice. But no real parachutes yet. Anyway, we've got a contract to build the V2 rocket, so we'll fly into the vehicle assembly. Now this one we actually want to go to space. It should go onto a suborbital trajectory. And I suppose the A3 design I've built technically could, but it would just kind of brush the edge of space and it would have to go straight up, and that wouldn't be very good for kind of testing how we want to get launch profiles. So let's start a new vehicle. Again, we'll start with the Octo core. And if you can hear the rain, that's because I live in the attic room, got a skylight, and the rain is just hammering it down at the moment. So, because we want this to go to space, we are going to have the fuel in the nose cone. But because I also want to be transmitting a bit more science, we're going to put some more batteries on here, because we'll have slightly more thrust, slightly more fuel. Put that on there. Some science. Again, we're just going to go with the simple Reflectron, which covers 500 kilometers of range. This thing's not going to orbit, we don't need long-term communications with it. It's going to just crash back to Earth anyway, we're not going to try and save it. Whack our basic science instruments on here. Put a barometer on there. Perfect. And then we're going to go with 2 of these Thumper fuel tanks. Now let's see whether the thumper... 3,500. That's more than enough to get us into a suborbital trajectory that'll go pretty high up. So we go with some thumper control fins. I like to use 3. You can use 4, but 3 is more cost effective and will give you the same level of control. And we've got some inline reaction wheels. Now we have got reaction wheels in there, but I think we're also going to pop one just in here. And hopefully that'll give us a bit more control over how this thing turns. I'm also going to disable pitch, yaw and roll on all 3 of these, because I think that was causing a lot of the wobbling that we were having last time. So this we're going to name as V2. Save that up. Can we put any of these on? No. So there's no point putting any kind of launch structures on here. I've meddled with building girder adapters into kind of basic launch clamps, but it's just really unnecessary. So we'll save that. We'll whack it onto launch, and we'll try and get this thing past the edge of space, get it into very, very low space flight, probably around 75 or 80 kilometers up on Kerbin. Collect as much science data as we can until the batteries die, and just complete the contract. So before we do anything else, I want to log the seismic data, because this is a pretty good experiment. 50 MITs though, it's so expensive. Okay, maybe we won't do that one. That's just going to be a waste of materials. However, we can start doing stuff as we're flying, so let's whack this up. We'll do pressure data, and we'll upload the data on that one. That's 8.3 science right there. Log some temperature. There we go. Now, the sound mod that you can hear is a mod called Chatterer, which simulates both probe beeps and SSTV. If it's too loud for you guys when the video audio actually goes up, let me know in the comments and I'll fiddle around with the audio there. So, we're coming up to about a kilometre. The thing's flying steady, it's staying on course. Probably helped quite a lot by the fact this rocket is beautifully gimbaled, which gives us much more control. For those of you who are new to Kerbal Space and don't know what gimbling is, that's essentially a bit of movement in the rocket motor's direction of thrust, so you can angle and steer the rocket more effectively. I'm going to start to cut my throttle now, because once things get over Mach 1 too low, and get too fast too low, it can lead to a lot of aerodynamic instability. So that's perfect. We've got that up to good speed. We're going up pretty well. Plenty of fuel left. We are going to make it. So now we're going to start just very carefully and very gently angling this over. Now for aerodynamics, I use Ferrum Aerospace. It's a fantastic mod that makes the atmosphere on Kerbin a lot less soupy. A lot less soupy. You can now fly through it. Planes work properly. Planes are much harder to build, but they actually work properly. So the atmosphere generates less lift, but it's easier to get things balanced. But it does mean that when you're making what's called a gravity turn, which is this manoeuvre here, to start getting it flipping over so the Earth's rotating in the opposite direction to this thing's travelling around to get a speed boost, you have to be much more careful or you'll flip the thing, because it will just slam into a wall of air at high speed, and the wall of air will go, nope, and push your rocket back over, you'll go tumbling, and that's a waste of a mission and 15 grand of your space program's money. So now that we're up fairly high, I think we can start to tip this over to about 90 degrees on the nav ball and go up to full throttle. Do some more science experiments, and the 10.8 science there from the upper atmosphere. Same again for that. That's not killed our steering. It's taken us down below the power limit to transmit stuff though, so no data from space this time. But as this thing gets pretty fast, and as it leaves the atmosphere, you can see it turns much more easily now that we've left the thickest part of the atmosphere behind. This thing is going to go pretty high up. So we're looking at about, well, over 100,000 metres on the map. I'm going to take this thing fully horizontal so it just doesn't go too high. Not that it's really an issue, but we'll just have to see how this keeps going. So it's actually almost approached orbital velocity burning like this. In fact, I think it will. No, just below orbital velocity, about 200 or 300 metres per second off. But that's when you start to develop multi-staging rockets. See some nice cities down there. See the Kerbal Space Centre down in that corner. Now, if we take a look at the map, we're going up to 151,000 metres. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that just absolutely beautiful, guys? Space is a fantastic place, and more people should be excited about space travel and space exploration. It's so cool. The idea that humans, who for literally hundreds of thousands of years have had our feet just clamped on the ground, have in the last 100 years or so made more advances in science and technology than we have in the last I'd say probably 8,000 years. We've gone to space, gone to the moon, we've sent robots to Mars, and eventually we're going to send people there. And that is really cool. And I think more people should be excited about it and believe in it. Believe in humanity's ability to do things that are difficult, that are scary and are expensive, but are just essential for where we want to go and where we need to go in our future if we want to have a positive future for our species, really. We've got to adapt to a changing environment and adapt to the fact that there's more environments out there. Anyway, enough of me rattling on about my personal passions for space. Let's try and get some data transmitted from space. Hopefully this will actually be able to transmit. Yes! There we go. So I'll disable that. That's some science data from space. We can be excited about that. We've completed our V2 contract. 15 grand, 5 science, 50 reputation. We've escaped the atmosphere. 35 grand, 6 science. And we've completed some more records. Altitude records, speed records. Again, reached space. And land distance records of 100 kilometres. This is an exciting thing. As this is now just kind of continuing on its journey and plummeting back to space, I'll just talk you through remote tech. So remote tech is the one that requires you to have connections to your satellites, and you've got the antennas, they have ranges, etc. And they have to ultimately connect to the Kerbal Space Center if they're unmanned, for you to be able to transmit controls, send data back, etc. So this little line here represents the radio connection that we've got. And that goes from our space probe, the V2, back to the Kerbal Space Center, represented by the red dot here on the map. Now eventually I'll be building a satellite network to allow communications, essentially a GPS, and allows to beam communications out to satellites going to play at the moon, Minmus, etc. But that's probably going to be for another video. So now, before we end, let's return to the Space Center. And when we're at the Space Center, I think we'll take a look at some science, spend our science points, and then in the next video we'll look at expanding our tech tree further, taking on some more contracts, and expanding where we go with our science program. So, 310 grand, 64 science. We can get stability with lovely wings, cockpits, nose cones, etc. Survivability, parachutes, batteries, fuel cells, some landing gear, heat shields, very, very important for returning to the atmosphere, more parachutes and some radiators. And finally, general rocketry, which allows us to build slightly bigger rockets and also, more importantly, smaller rockets to allow for more weight-efficient probe bodies going up into space. And some launch clamps to keep the things charged on the launch pads. Perfect. Oh, and we can get modular wings, just to add some more wings in there. So, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video of Kerbal Space Program. I hope you're going to want to see more of this career, and as we progress through the history of essentially human rocket science. And yeah, I really hope this is something that you guys want to see more of. If it is, feel free to leave a like or leave a comment if you've got something to say about how I've done stuff in the video, or if you've got any questions about how to play Kerbal Space. If you want to see a real master at work, go and look at Scott Manley's channel. He's fantastic for Kerbal Space resources. And yeah, if you like what I'm doing in the channel, you want to see more videos, whether it's RimWorld, Kerbal Space or War Thunder, feel free to subscribe, leave me a message, etc. And thank you very much for watching. Okay, bye-bye.